I've been worrying about going bald recently. I know that it's a pretty silly worry, there's no shame in baldness, and it's a very vain thing to stress over. But I think it's the thing that keeps me up at night the most right now. Not global warming, or what's happening in the Middle East, or systemic inequality in my own country, whether or not I am balding. Perhaps it's the fact that I am transgender, which is why my fear of baldness is so overwhelming. But making excuses for the fear feels even more like an exercise in vanity. My grandfather and my uncle lost their hair, and while nobody else in my family has, my maternal grandfather has kept all his hair well into his 70s. I find myself constantly checking, taking photos of the back of my head, examining myself for patches. There are none. And I know there are none. I'm in my early 20s. Even if I do lose my hair, it most likely won't happen until I'm older. But most likely isn't definite, and until I'm older could be tomorrow. So I keep checking. The first time I had an anxiety attack, I was 11. I remember it clearly. I had been on a walk with my father and my brother, and we had talked about HIV. My mother had worked in an AIDS hospice during the 90s, near to where the trail started, and so my dad had decided to reminisce in the presence of his children, telling us about her work, what our mum had done, and the horrific disease that the people she was working with had died of. He told us about the delayed response by Western governments, and how, because the disease's main victims were either heroin addicts or queer people, a HIV diagnosis was, and still is, often seen by society at large as a punishment for moral failure. The hospice is gone now. He had a larger point to make, but I was clearly in a weird time in my life, and left worried that I had somehow contracted the disease, and that I was going to die. I stayed up crying. My second ever anxiety attack was the following day. For months I would wash my hands until they bled, wrapping my hands in fabric to cover my scabs so that they wouldn't get infected. I was terrified of getting ill. Completely and utterly terrified. The attacks and the compulsions lasted about half a year, and then they cleared. I read Kafka's short story A Hunger Artist recently. It's about a man who sits in a cage starving himself before an audience, making a spectacle of his emaciated body. His boss makes sure that he can only starve himself for 40 days, and he's pulled out of the cage after that time in a big ceremony. But the artist finds himself constantly disappointed. He knows that he can fast for longer if only he were allowed to. Nobody believes him. They don't recognise, as he calls it, the skill of his art. They appreciate the spectacle, and what it does for them in entertainment terms, that they don't have to think about those actually starving when viewing someone who does so willingly, but doubt that he would really want to continue. They enjoy eating, enjoy food, enjoy the feeling of being full, and assume that he must as well. My most recent seriously anxious episode was in May of 2022. I've been doing pretty well in the year and a half since, but it seriously hit me for 6, in a way that took a long time to recover from. My memory of the episode is patchy. I think that's probably normal during times of high stress, but I remember not leaving my flat for days on end. I found it hard to eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. I remember calling people at 2 a.m, having a panic attack, and then not being able to fully articulate the anxiety. My family's calls and text messages were left on read or unanswered because I didn't have the energy. My flatmate tried to cheer me up by playing the guitar together, but we had to stop early. I was unable to play. My head was too full for anything else. Socially, I was dead, removed. I felt like a ghost, a shell of my former self, and at the time I had no idea how or even whether I would become whole again. I spend a lot of time worrying about the future. I think this is related to my fear of balding. I'm about to finish my undergraduate degree within the next few months, and I think I'm currently experiencing ego death because of it. I went into my degree so sure of myself and what I wanted to do with my life, and now I have no idea. Everything seems to have changed. I feel like the more I theoretically know about a topic, the less I find myself able to talk about it, and the less sure of myself I become. I want to be able to fill those gaps, to explore the avenues of nuance that I previously thought didn't exist, but I don't know if I'm intelligent or curious enough to pursue them. I tell myself that this is normal, that everyone feels like this sometimes, that identifying what you don't know is key to the process of learning, but it feels hopeless. I'm running out of time, and I'm spending it writing scripts for video essays that I don't even fully know I'll make. It probably is because I'm transgender. My fear of balding represents a part of a larger fear, I think. That of not being recognised as how I want to be perceived. If I say I am something, then I don't want to be undermined by my own body. The first and only poem I wrote while I was in Germany opens with the line, "Sometimes I wonder whether I'm a bad feminist." I wrote that staying up wondering whether my obsession with my hairline is problematic. 'Cause maybe it is. Maybe by thinking that losing my hair would stop me from being perceived how I want, I'm denying the femininity of other balding trans femmes. My therapist once asked if I wanted medication to manage my anxiety, and I said no, as I thought that talking therapy would probably be enough. She said nothing in response. The NHS dismissed me a few weeks later. This record player was a gift that I got for Christmas the year after my 18th birthday. I used to bring it into the kitchen I share with 3 other people, but I don't do that anymore. Instead, I found a nice place to put it, clearing out some of my bookshelf, resting it on a book of Soviet propaganda posters so that it doesn't fall down. I used to put it on all the time, but now I think I just display it more than I honour its intended function. I put a record in the machine to take a video of it spinning, but the song you hear right now isn't even what you're watching. Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, the best-selling jazz album of all time. Eventually, the hunger artist joins a circus and finally fasts for as long as he can. He should be happy, but there's no audience to watch his feat of self-restraint. After a certain time, even the circus staff forget that he's there, and they stop updating the sign that says how long he's been starving himself. Eventually, even he forgets how long it has been. He destroys himself for his art, starving himself in his cage, but there's nobody there to witness. Spoilers, but at the end of the story, he dies without any glory. His artwork, finally complete, he's just an emaciated corpse in a cage. A lifeline came, disguised as flapjacks. My friends invited me round to do some baking, and I surprised myself by saying yes. I explained that I had been going through it, and they understood. Didn't ask anything, or mind when I stopped to do a breathing exercise or excuse myself for a moment. It took a while, but, slowly, I relaxed. The flapjacks were really good as well. I was, frankly, too much of a mess to actually do much of the baking, so my friends did most of it, and they were really good cooks. The following day, I went for a walk, then I saw friends, had a pint, got drunk, caught up with people I hadn't interacted with in ages, went home for a while and visited my mother. Anything to get me out of the flat and that anxious, depressive space. I called my GP and told him about the episode, explaining that I've had anxiety attacks since I was 11, and he put me on the waiting list for talking therapy. He offered me medication, and I said that I'd rather try talking about my problems first, and then I continued trying to recover, distracting myself, forcing myself to be sociable, finding ways not to slip into a panic. A year and a half later, I still find myself racked with worry, but I'm overall okay. One day that will change, but today is not that day. There's this piece I've been listening to a lot recently. Forgive my pronunciation, but the version of Polegnala a Tudora, Tudora has lied down by the Koutev Ensemble. It's a Bulgarian folk song. I don't have any connection to Bulgaria, and I don't speak Bulgarian, but I've been putting it on repeat every day as I make the travel through the Scottish winter to my university library. The piece is soft, both in terms of dynamics and timbre. It feels gentle, slow, quiet. Sometimes I manage to catch the lift alone and stare at nothing, watch the numbers as they climb from floor to floor. I try to zone out, think of as little as I can, let myself drown in the sound of this Bulgarian folk choir, and then the door opens. It's strophic, meaning that the melody is the same with every verse, but the music ends up feeling slightly lower at the end of the piece than at the start. It might be a tuning issue, or it might be that the melody generally ends on a lower note than it begins. But I like it. It makes me feel as if I've reset, and reminds me how far the piece has musically travelled, the feat that the conductor and the musicians have achieved, even though it felt the same with every repetition.